It's 4 o'clock, so we'll get started. So I'm going to be talking about MySQL forks. So I assume everybody uses MySQL, or MySQL is the people who write it will tell you it's supposed to be called. So a little about me. I've been doing MySQL stuff for a while. I started out at Omniture, worked at Spark Networks, which does dating sites, LDS singles, JDate, biggest. They own like the top 3 Jewish sites, so they pretty much have the market. CrimeReports.com, work with police agencies, and then lately just been doing my own thing. So, how many of you are familiar with the different MySQL forks, what they are? What are the options? Have you guys used anything besides stock MySQL?
Postgres. Which one do you get when you yum install?
Stock MySQL.
I looked at Percona for a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so you have Oracle MySQL. Used to be just MySQL, then it was Sun, and now it's Oracle. So it was written by Monty Wydenius. So that's, I mean, there's not much to say about it. That's the original. That's the one that's actually called MySQL. Drizzle started out as MySQL 6.0, I believe. It was a major fork, and Sun, I think, didn't really want to go ahead with the direction they were going, and so they laid them all off, and they just went and started their own company. So they actually have some big sponsors, and I think Rackspace supports them, and some other things. So, but they've done a ton. I mean, it's not really. It's a MySQL derivative, but it's hardly recognizable anymore. Percona, which is very popular among those who pay attention as far as MySQL and what MySQL they're using. Percona is, they started out just selling support for MySQL, and they still do that. In fact, if you want some really high-end MySQL support, they're who I'd recommend. They really know what they're talking about. If you've got massive servers that they do tons of testing on all sorts of different hardware configurations. They post their information, a lot of it, on what they can. If they don't have confidentiality agreements with their customers, they'll post their information about different RAID controllers, different SSDs, how they all stack up against each other, different versions of MySQL. How they interact, different situations, how they handle them. So they started a few years ago. They started publishing. They had a collection of patches, and so they just started publishing their own version of MySQL. They call it Percona Server. It's very enterprise focused. MariaDB. This is also by Monty Wydenius, the guy who originally wrote it. He left Sun and then got more not happy with them after they got bought by Oracle. He wasn't very happy about that. He started his own project called MariaDB, forked MySQL. He's still pulling in stuff from the main tree, but they're adding features, and he's got a lot of good people there. So there's some other what you might call forks, but they're not. They don't actually ship you can't just yum install a server or apt-get install it. They're actually just collections of patches, and these patches are actually incorporated in. A lot of these are incorporated in Percona. Almost all of them are incorporated in MariaDB. So Google has a bunch of patches. Semi-sync replication. What that is your transaction doesn't commit on the server until at least one of the slaves has acknowledged it. The slave doesn't have to actually perform the transaction, but if you know how the MySQL replication works, it just passes the information in a log file down to their slaves. And so what semisync does is make sure that that information got down to at least one of the slaves. It doesn't have to have applied it yet, but at least it has the information. So you have the information somewhere besides the master before it moves on. So that's a kind of a crash-safe scenario. Global transaction IDs, which helps in certain situations where you have circular replication or odd replication layouts. And lots of symmetric multiprocessing improvements. So everybody's running lots of cores these days, some more than others. MySQL was running into issues with more than, just a couple years ago, they were having issues with 8 cores, more than 8 cores. And so there were a lot of people working on that, trying to remove some of the lock contention and stuff that was causing problems. And so they were working on getting that. Facebook has a bunch of patches. Group commit, which makes your binary log more stable, more crash safe. Flash cache, which is a way to use a flash storage device as a cache for you, a write-through cache for your hard drive, since you can write to that faster. And then lots of statistical stuff. So getting information about what's happening on your server. eBay.
Does Percona bring all those in?
Percona has, I don't know if they have Facebook's statistics, but they have their own. Percona has statistics like nobody else. So, although MariaDB pulls in pretty much everything Percona has. So, eBay, they had the dynamic rows for the heap engine. So if you use is it called the memory storage engine now? I think they changed it to memory instead of heap. But anyway, it only supported fixed length rows. They made a patch that makes it support dynamic row length. So just a little something. So let's talk about Oracle MySQL, the one most people use. They've actually done a lot in 5.5 and 5.6 to optimize it. They've added, if you're using, and you probably aren't, if you're using NDB, which is the MySQL cluster product, they have a memcache interface for it. They added that in 5.5, I believe. In 5.6, they have a memcache interface for InnoDB. You can interact with a InnoDB table as if it was a memcache server. So it would have to be a simple, memcache doesn't support complex table types. So you're talking key value pairs. So it'd have to be a simple table, I'd assume. I haven't actually used that. So they also, one of the big problems, who does replication with MySQL? Most people end up doing it eventually. So if you heard of the row-based replication they introduced in 5.1, one of the problems with the row-based replication, and the reason hardly anybody actually uses it, is because you can't debug it. You go in and they have that tool to let you look at what's happening in the binary log, but you can't actually see what statement produced that. You just see, oh, we're changing these rows. So it was great for keeping things trim and just sending it to the slaves, but not so great for actually figuring out what's happening on your server. So in 5.6, they've added they actually send along the actual statement with the changes. So it makes it more useful. Viability. So according to something, this is about a year ago, it said that of the 450 MySQL AB people who joined Sun, 54 are left.
Is that through attrition or layoffs? Or?
Now, some of that could be, that's all the way going through Sun and then to Oracle. So I'd imagine some of those are sales guys and marketing and, those kind of types. I don't know how many of those are developers. So again, this information is a year old, but it came from Monty Wadenius, so he knows all those guys. He said only 2 of the core developers are left as of a year ago. Many of those original core developers have left to go work at Percona, Drizzle, or MariaDB. Now, it's not all bad news. InnoDB was never part of MySQL. InnoDB was developed separately and was actually bought by Oracle before MySQL was bought by Sun. And so they're actually still, their team is pretty well intact. They've been there for quite a while. So the InnoDB team is all pretty much together still. But they were never part of the core MySQL developer group. NDB, the MySQL cluster, they were also a separate thing. They were bought and brought in. So their team is still there. So another thing that people are concerned about is whether Oracle, how committed is Oracle to open source and to continuing to support it. They've dropped the annual MySQL conference. This was the first year they didn't have one. And last year they barely attended. I think they attended. They didn't sponsor or anything. They're only somewhat involved. Oracle hasn't treated some of their other open source projects that they acquired from Sun very well. I don't know if anyone's familiar with OpenOffice, how all the mess that happened there. Jenkins. Is it Jenkins? What was it?
Hudson.
Hudson. Yeah, Hudson. Now it's Jenkins. Yeah. So Hudson. There's one other I thought.
What was that?
Hudson.
Continuous integration system.
Yeah. It's called Jenkins now.
Yeah.
So. And then I think there was one other, but actually Hudson is still, in both of those cases, Oracle has managed to fork the project, to split the community. By driving enough people away, in both cases they drove tons of people away from the project, and they felt like they had to just fork it and start all over again. But then once they'd driven enough people away, Oracle said, "Oh, we'll just donate it to the Apache Foundation." And so then everyone who was left went with the one that went to the Apache Foundation. So you still have OpenOffice and LibreOffice, and you still have Hudson and Jenkins. I don't know if the Hudson project still is it pretty much died?
Around. Yeah, everyone's on
Okay.
Jenkins that I know right now.
Okay. I know OpenOffice has been struggling, but they're still around. Anyway, people are concerned. We'll say that. Another thing we've been seeing with, since they acquired it, there has been some focus on closed source features that they're not releasing to the community. So, and then another problem that they're having is that they can't use GPL patches, and all the other Percona and MariaDB are just doing everything as GPL, and so they can't use their stuff. They have to re-implement any good ideas that come from the community. They have to re-implement. So that's a problem. Drizzle. Drizzle is a microkernel architecture. Does everyone know what that means? If you're younger, you might not have gotten into that whole bad. Yeah. Anyway, so it's just the kernel does a few things, and you have more. It's more like a plug-in module type thing that everything's handled by modules around the basic kernel. One thing they've done, who's ever compiled MySQL?
Tried.
From source. You tried? Anybody compiled? Yeah. How many errors or warnings did you get? It just spews warnings when you try to compile MySQL. It's just you can, each file it tries to compile, you'll get 50 warnings for at least. So it's a mess. Drizzle has no compile warnings. They've completely gotten rid of all those. So they cleaned up the code really well. They have a BSD licensed client that's compatible with MySQL. That's, for those who don't know, that's actually a big deal. MySQL's official client is GPL'd, and so it's not able to be used in certain situations. They do have what they call it, a floss exception on their, or FOSS exception to the GPL built into their license. So they do allow, so you can use it like, I think it was PHP was the big one that they were having problems with, because PHP wasn't GPL, and so you weren't really able to use MySQL with, anyway, it was a big mess. So they just released a BSD one. And that was something that MySQL did further down the line, where the original client was LGPL, and then they changed it to GPL later. Drizzle is remove lots of the gotchas. Who's ever done a Cartesian join in MySQL? It's where you don't put any kind of stuff on your join.
It's where your memory fills up until the output
yes.
kills your MySQL.
It never returns. You never actually get results. Whoever does a Cartesian join on purpose? I've never met anyone who did a Cartesian join on purpose. Maybe today will be the day, but I doubt it'll happen. They got rid of that. They said if you don't, you have to at least put like a 1 = 1 on there or something. You have to do something to say, no, I really meant to do a Cartesian join. Otherwise, it'll just barf and say, no, don't be stupid. You don't really want to do that. It breaks the SQL spec, but honestly, that's not a bad thing sometimes. You can't, if you've used the enum type in MySQL, one thing that you can do, you can actually end up with null values even if you declare a column is not null. Don't ask me why. Anyway, they don't allow that. They have a 64-bit date time with microseconds. So the microseconds are always stored. It's just optional whether you get them. You can choose whether to get microseconds or not in your result. And they have native IPv6 support as far as data type. And they're UTF-8 only. There's none of this Swedish whatever. Everyone know that MySQL defaults to Swedish? Yes, your database is in Swedish. The default collation is Latin 1 Swedish. So it's a Latin 1 storage, but it's Swedish collation. So, yeah. They remove some other what they consider troublesome features. They remove stored procedures. They're not opposed to stored procedures. They've actually reintroduced them since then. But they felt that the MySQL implementation of them sucked. And honestly, I don't know a lot of people who use them. So triggers, they got rid of that. Again, they felt that the implementation sucked. They weren't morally opposed to them. They just felt that it should be done better. They got rid of views. I'm not sure why they felt that sucked, but they decided it sucked, and so they got rid of it.
Introduced procedures, but triggers and views are not in Drizzle?
I'll get to that in the next slide. I'm not sure about triggers. Might have shown up, and views I think are kind of coming back.
Okay.
So I've got that on the next.
You know where I work, and we don't use it really, but in my own place of work, we use all that stuff all the time, and that's all that stuff can be handy.
Yeah. Well, Drizzle is made to be a very optimized, and then you see when I show you some of the cool features they've added. There's some very specific situations where Drizzle is very good.
Okay.
They're made for specific situations. They're not trying to be everything to everybody. They're trying to be. Their play is as a niche player. So they got rid of time zone support. So you don't have to declare time zone. It's just everything's UTC. You can only store stuff in UTC. And they got rid of Windows support. That was considered troublesome. They simplified some of their data types. They decided that tiny int, small int, medium int, that was ridiculous. They just have 32-bit and 64-bit integers. They got rid of the set. Does anyone use set? The set data type? If you have, I'm sorry. There's a reason they got rid of it. There are very good reasons. They came to the conclusion that, like if you set up a blob, what's the max size on a blob? Anyone know?
I think I've ever hit it.
64K. Yep, 64K. There's lots of reasons to store stuff more than 64K. The reason, you can also do medium blobs and long blobs and whatever. So they said, well, why do we, we're storing stuff that's huge, and we're worrying about, a couple bytes in the length part of it. That's kind of silly. So they just said, we'll just use a 32-bit length thing, and so your blobs can be 4 gig. So same thing for text, which is just a different type of blob. They actually have a Boolean type. MySQL does not have a Boolean type. Drizzle does. MySQL pretends it has a Boolean type. You can declare a column as Boolean. It will call it a tiny int. So they have a UUID type. So it's its own data type. It includes a timestamp in the UUID. And so you're able to treat it as a timestamp in using function calls and stuff. You can actually get time information out of it. But it's still a UUID. Like I said, they have an IPv6 type. Okay, pluggable modules. So this is where a lot of their cool stuff happens. So they've made everything, they've just exposed APIs and made it so you can plug in stuff. Logging. So you don't have to, you can log to whatever you want. Authentication. You can authenticate with LDAP. Ever heard of such a thing? You can authenticate using your, the operating system credentials. You can use, PAM or whatever. So you can do any kind of authentication that you can write a module for. Replication. So you can plug in any kind of replication. They're known, so replication they have working on Gearman and RabbitMQ. So you can use those for replication. The protocol itself is pluggable. So it currently supports the MySQL protocol. They have their own Drizzle protocol. And they have memcached protocol support. So you can use any of those to talk to your database. Stored procedures is pluggable as well. So you can get stored procedure support for whatever language you want by just creating the module for it. Currently, the only language they support is JavaScript. So you can write JavaScript stored procedures now. They're kind of focusing on the web thing, so it makes sense. Their integration, I mentioned RabbitMQ. Memcached, they have some stuff that integrate directly with Memcached. Cassandra, Gearman, ZeroMQ. They have a JSON API. So they're making, what they're trying to build is something that's great for web applications and being able to communicate with lots of different things.
Is that a protocol essentially? The JSON
No, these are actually integrations. So it's the JSON, yeah.
So you can rest.
Yeah, it's basically yep. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I don't need it.
I'm sure as heck not going to expose it to the internet. But some of the other improvements, replication. Does everyone know what the what's it called? Group commit. Heard of that? group commit is some big long thing. The big problem is, I mentioned it earlier, where MySQL, where when you're using replication, when you commit a transaction, how do you commit the transaction to the disk and then, and make sure that the binary log is also updated and nothing gets written to the binary log that's not committed to disk, and nothing gets committed to disk that isn't written to the binary log? How do you do that all without ever having a problem? That was the group commit problem that they were having. They solved this problem by just putting all the replication stuff in ODB. And then when you commit, it's committed. It's all just part of the same transaction. So it's already solved for them. So they actually, group commit actually ends up syncing 3 times, I believe, to disk. And they only sync once to disk because of that. So it's actually a more efficient solution. They also support multi-source replication, so you can have more than one master for a single slave. So it's useful in some situations. Multi-tenancy. They have what they call catalogs, which are a collection of schemas. So a catalog, basically think of it like a virtual host of databases. So you basically you can have multiple schemas or databases in one catalog, and it has its own authentication scheme and everything. It's all, it's effectively its own server, database server that you're talking to. And there's no way to join across or get to any other catalogs on there. It's its own thing.
You actually connect to it with like a different string or different port or something, or what?
I believe you'd have to use a different port, yeah. Yep. But they have it just under one instance of MySQL. So it's great for, again, I mentioned Drizzle. I think I mentioned that their Rackspace is one of their big customers. So for big hosting companies, it actually makes a lot of sense. Like I said, you can't cross catalog boundaries. So you can think of them, if you use Linux containers, OpenVZ, stuff like that. It's kind of like that kind of, it's not a true virtual host, but it's more like that. It's a container for your database.
Is it able to constrain any resources on a per container basis?
I think so, yes. I'm not positive on that.
If it does, it's on.
So, future improvements. It's supposed to have some kind of tuple support, so you can actually, in a single column, have multiple key value pairs. So that would basically give you a lot of the benefits of some kinds of NoSQL servers. You can have, you basically have a dynamic column or dynamic columns where you can just say, oh, I just want to call it, I'm going to add some arbitrary key value pairs to this row. LDAP support, I believe they've almost got that worked out. Their new protocol they're working on. Viability. They don't have a huge following. They do have some big customers. So Google and Rackspace. They did finally, after several years of not really releasing anything production worthy, they finally did a real release in 2011. It's not backwards compatible, so it's not a drop-in replacement. You can't just drop in Drizzle and expect it to work with your code. So there's going to be some stuff you'll have to do. But there are good things for it. So Percona Server.
Was that the one?
Huh?
Which one was Drizzle the one that the original writer went to?
No, that's MariaDB. We'll get to that at the end. Drizzle, the main guy is Brian Aker, who he started out at Slashdot, and then he went to MySQL, and then he's doing Drizzle now. So I think he's known as Crow or something like that. But so Percona Server is based on the Oracle MySQL. They don't do a ton to change it. They just do some very specific optimizations. They try to keep it as close to the source as possible. They have their own InnoDB fork called ExtraDB that they use. It's highly optimized. That's where they've focused a lot of their efforts are in this InnoDB fork, not in other stuff. I mentioned before they do a lot of testing on high-end systems. So if you are, if you're someone if you're doing stuff with 48 cores and big SSD drives and stuff like that, they're good people to talk to. So I would recommend them. They do a ton of testing on that kind of stuff. They have lots of additional statistics. I believe that their stuff they've got now, you can, like if you do an alter table and you're sitting there wondering how long it's going to take, you can do a show process list and it'll tell you what percentage it's at. So very nice. Extra backup. The InnoDB has a hop backup product that you have to pay for. Same thing, except it works with more than just InnoDB, and it's free. So I like free. HandlerSocket support. HandlerSocket is a very cool NoSQL interface to your InnoDB tables, developed by a gaming company in Japan. It basically lets you just directly get in without using SQL. You just do some simple, you're only operating on row, for single row stuff, inserts, updates, deletes, selects. You can just get single rows, but it does it very fast because they're eliminating a lot of the overhead. This is some of the testing they got. Queries per second, and you can see the CPU utilization. So using MySQL, 105,000 queries per second. Memcache, so this is just a pure Memcache server, 420,000 queries per second, and HandlerSocket got 750,000 queries per second. So very cool. They're very, I should say this is read-only queries per second. But this gaming company, they're storing stuff all the time. They're doing lots of little things, and so it was something they developed to make things a lot. If you're using Memcache, a lot of people who uses Memcache. Okay, yeah, lots of people use Memcache. Memcache is great. It's easy to throw stuff in. The problem is it's not synced up with your data. It's not your actual store. What HandlerSocket lets you do is have something like Memcache, except it's always in sync with your data. You don't have to worry about invalidating your cache when you change the data. You don't have to go change it in your Memcache as well. You just have to change it in one place, and it's done. And you can insert stuff really fast into this NoSQL API, and then when you want to run a report, you can just run that in SQL. So you can do join it against other tables and do anything you want. So I mentioned that. One thing they do to get this, and so you should be aware of it, to get the performance they get is that they'll wait a little bit to actually commit your writes. So if you do an update or an insert, they'll actually sit on it for a little bit. I mean, we're talking like 1/10 of a second. Not very long, but they will sit on it for a little bit before they actually commit it to disk. The reason for that is that by grouping a ton of them together, you're updating your indexes less. It's a lot more efficient for your database to do it that way. So by doing that, you get more efficiency. You do run the risk of, if your server crashes, you could lose a tenth of a second's worth of data that hadn't been committed to disk yet. As long as your data isn't that critical, then you're okay. I wouldn't recommend using HandlerSocket to write your billing transactions to disk. But for the last time someone logged in, go ahead, knock yourself out. It'll be great. The other little caveat is that HandlerSocket has no security, period. They have this little, you can put a password on it, but it's just, it doesn't actually, you can, if you have access to HandlerSocket, you can write anything in the database. You can write to whatever table you want to and do whatever you want. So, no security.
That's very much like NoSQL.
Yeah. So, viability, it's dependent on MySQL. However, they could rebase it on MariaDB if they wanted. It would probably be pretty easy for them. In fact, MariaDB already has most of their stuff, so it wouldn't be hard for them at all. If anything happened where they weren't able to continue using MySQL. They're very compatible with stock MySQL, so they're very easy to just drop in. You can drop in and then you can switch it back out for stock MySQL if you want. No problems at all. So that's Percona. The last one we're going to talk about is MariaDB. Now this one is more of a, so Percona is kind of a lightweight fork. And then you have, the Drizzle is, that's a major thing. MariaDB is kind of in between. They're a major fork, but they're not going all crazy like Drizzle has. So I mentioned it was forked by Monty Wadenius, the guy who originally wrote MySQL. Bit of trivia: it was named after his daughter. It's his third child, second daughter named Maria. His first daughter is named Mai. That's what MySQL was named for. It wasn't, Mai as in my own. It was actually named after his daughter named Mai. They did have, if you followed MySQL for very long, you may have heard of, they bought some product a while back and they renamed it MaxDB. He has a son named Max. That's his second child. So now all of his kids have their own database named after them. MariaDB, they pull in all the Percona stuff. Google, they try to be a community-oriented fork of MySQL, so they're pulling in whatever the community's doing. They want to be a part of that, and so they're pulling in everything they can. One of the big problems that there is with MySQL is that it may be free, but the documentation isn't. You can only get the MySQL documentation at the MySQL site. You cannot get it anywhere else. I know PHP has theirs all over the place. They have mirrors all over the place, and anyone can just grab it and do whatever they want with it. MySQL does not have that. And so one of the things they're working on is trying to correct that problem by creating their own documentation. It's a work in progress. They have an LGPL client library. So they took the last released LGPL version of the MySQL client library and then worked on that to get it up to the current specs. They, just like Drizzle, they focused on getting no compiler warnings with one little asterisk there. They left in stuff where they mix C and C++ a lot, and that'll generate compiler warnings. As long as they were able to satisfy themselves that particular compiler warning was just about the fact that they were mixing C and C++, they decided it was okay. Drizzle has actually gotten rid of those by not mixing C and C++. I think they got rid of all the C and they're just C++. Storage engines, they have tons of storage engines. Sphinx SE is built in. That's a storage engine for the Sphinx full text search engine. So it's a separate server you run, but it'll let you tie in directly, and you can do joins against your Sphinx results, which is very convenient. Area, which is Monty's little pet project. It's a replacement for the MyISOM. So they use that instead for temporary tables. These are tables that you're not actually creating. The tables that are just created on the fly when you're doing large joins and stuff like that. They actually use Area instead of MyISOM. It's crash safe. MyISOM is not crash safe. If you ever crashed a MyISOM table, you know what I'm talking about, because there's not much you can do about it. It'll eventually, in theory, become transactional, but they're not there yet. He's been working on it for years, so I don't know when that'll actually happen. ExtraDB, which is so they use that instead of InnoDB. PBXT, which is another transactional storage engine. I don't know anyone who actually uses it, but I hear it's actually pretty popular in certain circles. So it has some specific use cases where it is supposed to be very good for. So it's worth knowing about. Federated X. The federated table type was never really worked very well. This is kind of their version of it that's supposed to be better. So it just lets you can connect to a table on a different server, and it'll let you do stuff with that. OQGraph is a table type that lets you can actually put in nodes and edges and find the fastest path between those. You can give the edges weights, and it'll find the shortest distance between 2 points, which path you should take. For some people, that's really cool. For most people, that's not very useful. But it's kind of cool. They do have HandlerSocket, as long as using 5.3 or later of MariaDB. Oh, and this one, I haven't heard of this one, Marunga. I just saw it on their site. It's another full-text search storage engine, so similar to Sphinx. Optimizations, they focus on a lot of optimizations. If you've used subqueries in MySQL, I'm sorry, they suck. They've actually fixed them, made them actually work. Subqueries exist in MySQL, but they're horribly slow and suboptimal. So they've actually done some things.
Then pulling the data back out of the database in order to run the second query.
Yeah. Well, but originally their point, it took them a long time just to get subqueries, and the reason was, and this is a valid reason, that most of the time when you want to write a subquery, you're just being lazy and you should write a join. And that's true 99% of the time. There are cases where that's not true. And part of how they solved the subquery problem was by adding multi-table updates and deletes. That solved a lot of the use cases where just doing a join wasn't sufficient. They said, well, okay, we'll give you joins and updates and deletes, and then it'll solve all your problems. So it did actually make it so you could do all the same things, but they eventually added subqueries, and they just never made them work very well. So I use subqueries occasionally, but only in code when I'm just at the terminal doing stuff. I never actually do it in my real code because it's slow. Index merge optimization. This is something where it'll make certain cases where it can use 2 indexes instead of just 1. Generally, MySQL will only use 1 index. In this case, it'll find a way to use 2 indexes, get all the results back, merge them together, and see what it gets. So for certain queries, that actually helps a lot. They have the group commit patch for the binary log. Pool of threads. So instead of spinning up a new thread every time you get a connection, they just have a pool of threads. It's kind of the worker model in the Apache NPM. Segmented key cache. This solves a specific problem you have with MySQL where with your key cache, and under certain circumstances, I don't know, just having if you have a big key cache, it can run into problems. Their solution was just split it up into smaller key caches. They basically sharded. I mean, there are some potential problems you get with sharding, so there are some. It's not always faster than it would have been the other way, but it does solve a lot of the contention issues they had with it. Table elimination. If you've got a big hairy join and it realizes that you don't actually need this table in the middle of it, it'll just remove it from the join and not bother including it. There are cases where that's useful. Usually it's because you're using an ORM and your ORM hates you.
Do you recommend just avoiding ORMs?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I don't use them, but there are situations where I think ORMs are great.
Yeah, I've never used one. I've always just handcrafted all those.
That's how I prefer to do it, but you know, I will admit that I'm not the average web developer, so I'm not going to tell you that you should never use it. If you're going to use an ORM, just be aware of what it's doing, take care of it, and you know, ORMs are used a lot and very successfully. So I'm not saying they're like a bad, horrible thing.
Are there any particular ones that are really terrible? Or
I've had just the ones I've used. Rails. Had problem with my.
Make yourself because you didn't bother looking at what was available. That's probably the worst ORM.
Yeah. I mean, ORMs. A lot of times, ORMs have the problem is that they have features that will let you optimize things correctly, but the developers don't use them. So a lot of times it's not necessarily the ORMs just help developers be lazy and do things in stupid ways. Is my biggest issue. Yeah.
Stop thinking about SQL.
Yeah, but the problem is if you completely stop thinking about it, then you end up with really bad
They also seem to
database.
stop thinking about indexes too at the same time.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I don't think ORMs are a terrible thing. I just think they do bad things to your brain. So, handler improvements. Most people have no idea what that is. There's a way you can, over a normal SQL interface, you can skip the whole SQL part and just deal with the table, the storage engine directly. It's called Handler. They've gotten close to HandlerSocket speeds just by using that interface. So then anyway, it's a pretty,
So that's why
it's a low level.
called HandlerSocket.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just,
Socket into the handler.
yeah, right. Yep. Virtual columns. So you can set up a column in your table that is based on a function of other columns, either materialized or not. So if it's materialized, then when you write to the table, it will calculate it and write it out. If it's not materialized, when you read it, it will calculate it and send it back. Their syntax is based on the Microsoft and Oracle syntax. So if you use those, it should be familiar. Dynamic columns. Talk about that with Drizzle, with the tuple thing. They have something like that. The interface,
Another table.
huh?
How is that better than just having another table?
By having dynamic columns that you can just arbitrarily specify key value pairs on your row.
Why is that better than having a key value table that has primary key?
Well, for one thing, you have when you do that, you have index issues. I mean, you're doing a lot more indexing. So for writes and stuff, a key value table is not always a great solution. In fact, a lot of times it isn't.
No, I'm not saying it is,
But
I'm not sure how a key value column is going to be.
well, their implementation isn't very good either. So they kind of I think they did it like numerically, and so you have to remember what, in your code, you have to remember which number corresponds to which. Anyway, yeah. I'm not sure who thought that was a good idea, but they do have pluggable authentication, just like Drizzle. They support PAM. They have microsecond precision. And who was in my first presentation this morning? So you heard me talk about the GIS functions. So you weren't.
I was not.
So if you have a shape, did you know you can store shapes in MySQL?
Never done that, no.
Okay, you can store shapes in MySQL. Points, lines, arbitrary polygons. So you can store all that, and then you can say, I want to find all the, you have a database. The example I gave in my last company, crimereports.com, we'd have all the crime incidents, by date and where they happened. So we had them all pins on the map, right? So they're all points. And then we'd have, we're working with police agencies, they have beats. So each officer is assigned to a beat. So an officer comes to work, he wants to know, well, what happened over the last 8 hours on my beat? And so, or the last 24 hours or whatever. So he can just pull up a report and it'll tell him what happened on his beat. So the obvious way to do that would be able to say, well, I've got this, here's my beat, tell me all the points that are in that beat. MySQL has functions to do that. However, they don't work. What they do, you give them your nice pretty shape, and most beats, police beats are not rectangles. In MySQL, they become rectangles. It takes your shape that you've drawn and it puts the minimum bounding rectangle on it, and that's what it returns to you. So we actually had to get the results back from MySQL and then process them and filter out the ones that were actually in the shape and throw out the ones that weren't. So just an extra step there. I mean, the thing is, it's not a very hard, the algorithm for doing that is not very hard. So I don't know why they didn't do that in the first place, but anyway, MariaDB fixes that. They actually have the GIS functions. So if you're using GIS functions, that's one case where I would say switch to MariaDB. Just it'll save you. If you're using that stuff, just do it because it'll save you tons of time. The index merge optimization. This is something. Okay, so you have select star from on time where origin equals Seattle or destination equals Seattle. Right? So you're looking at flights. Now, this. Okay, so it's doing an index merge. It's returning 92,000 rows approximately according to the select. That's what the index is telling it. If you add and security delay equals 0, it actually, the number of rows that it gets from the index actually goes up. Now, if you think about that, if you and, you're just adding additional filtering. That number should go down. So other things will actually do worse. So this is not a good situation. So what they did, they actually made it so you can't use any index on that, but it'll use the index. It'll do the index merge there, like it did there, and then just loop through those results and figure out which ones have security delay equals 0. So anyway, basically it does it intelligently. It doesn't seem like that hard a thing, but viability. MariaDB hasn't gained a ton of traction, at least in the US. They have done more in Europe. They're mostly compatible with stock MySQL, but they're more willing to go ahead and break things than Percona is. For now, at least, they're somewhat dependent on the stock MySQL. Like I said, less than Percona. They do have a lot of the core guys there, so a lot of good stuff is happening there. So which one should you use? If you need cluster support, use Oracle. They're the only ones who support it. Nobody else does. Other than that, I can't think of a good reason to use Oracle's MySQL unless you have a great relationship with Oracle. I guess, that might be a good reason. If you already have, money burning a hole in your pocket, go ahead. If you're Percona, for Percona, if you need a high-performance enterprise database, which I assume most people would like, use Percona. They're great at that kind of stuff, especially as you're scaling up. They know what they're doing. They've fixed a lot of the problems. And Oracle has actually had to play catch-up to a lot of the stuff they've done. MariaDB, if you love the cool new features, they're a little more, like I said, they're a little more willing to break things and do crazy things. But they do have some cool new features, so if you really like cool new features, then use MariaDB. And Drizzle, I mean, the thing with Drizzle is there are some really good reasons to use it, but you have to think of it more as a completely separate, it's probably worse than switching to, from MySQL to Postgres as far as compatibility. I mean, it's just like its own, as far as what the features are and stuff like that. It's got some great things. If you're worried about connecting into all these different technologies, Gearman, RabbitMQ, ZeroMQ, those kinds of things, that might be very useful for you. If you don't care about compatibility, if you're starting a new project, this might be great. So, any questions?
Is there any one of them that gets replication more right than the others?
Look up, well, Drizzle does it totally differently. They've got their pluggable replication support. The others, Maria and Percona, do not change replication significantly, so if at all, and so that's not something they've focused on. So they're pretty much all doing it the same. If you want to use something different that works better, look up Tungsten. It's a separate thing, but it'll manage your replication for you. It lets you have a single, for example, you can just, you log into your Tungsten manager and you can say, okay, I want the master to be that one. Done. All of a sudden the master is that one.
Okay.
That easy. You can take, you can just say, I want this one to stop for a little bit, stop replicating so I can do something. It's very, very easy to manage. Very cool stuff. So,
out of these,
I believe it's Java based though. So if you don't want to run Java on your server, then
You can't have everything you want.
so which one of these is your favorite?
I currently use Percona. I've been tempted many times to move to MariaDB, but I haven't actually.
Maria have everything Percona has anyways?
Pretty much, yeah. And they've got some other cool new features. I've mostly stuck with Percona. I think the reason I've stuck with them, because I've actually looked into it a couple times, and I think Maria doesn't have packages for RHEL, so, or CentOS, so, or at least not up-to-date ones. So I was like, it's not worth compiling my own. Percona has packages for everybody, so stuck with Percona. Yeah. Anything else?
So the Percona storage engine is set to be able to take, I guess the other guys are using it now. So
their extra DB.
Oracle closes off on their DB.
Yeah.
They have a solution.
Yeah, and that's the thing. One of the great things about all these is that now, if anything happened with Oracle's, there are other options out there. There has a community's built up that there might be some slowdown initially as far as features and stuff coming out, but they've really come a long way towards being able to take over that. A lot of very smart, MySQL still has, or Oracle has the key InnoDB guys still, but there's some really smart guys who've really dug into InnoDB and understand it at Percona. So they've really got a handle on InnoDB like nobody else outside of Oracle. And then MariaDB has all the guys who are, the core optimizer, the actual MySQL guts outside of the storage engine. That's where they've really focused, except for their little area storage engine that Monty's been working on.
So Percona doesn't have the subquery optimizations or the
No.
merged indexes.
Nope.
So, aside from Drizzle, are these all in a state that if you're running stock MySQL that you yum install, can you just do a MySQL dump and will they cleanly import into the others?
Yeah, you can actually, you don't even have to MySQL dump. You can just,
Like
remove
binary
MySQL and, just binary. They're binary compatible as far as that. You can just,
I didn't expect to hope for that much.
yeah, you don't have to dump it all. Just use the same data.
Move to Drizzle with a dump and restore, or assuming you're not.
I think you have to use Drizzle's dump to make that work.
Okay.
They do have their dump will talk to MySQL, and so use the Drizzle dump to pull your data out and then push it into Drizzle.
So,
They all speak MySQL protocol pretty well, so that
Yeah.
all the existing.
Yeah, everybody except Drizzle. Drizzle has MySQL protocol support, but they're kind of moving towards their own protocol. But the rest are all, they haven't changed the protocol at all.
so do you recommend if you've already got a MySQL shop, switching to one of these?
I would switch to Percona if nothing else. There's not a lot of reasons not to switch to Percona.
You get a lot better performance.
Yeah, you'll get better performance, better statistics. It just makes your life a little easier.
I was looking at some
A couple
of the
extra features.
a while ago, a year or two ago, and I was having some troubles convincing an admin to apply patches to MySQL source.
Just-
Whereas this will solve
yeah,
that
just-
problem.
Install their server. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's me. That's how to get in touch with me. Thanks for coming. We ran a couple minutes over, so we've got about 12 minutes till the next presentation. So, thanks.